Hi there, and welcome along to my guide to starting to prepare your roses for the oncoming autumn and winter season. Now, depending on your location and which growing zone you're growing in, you're going to have to take some precautions over the next few months to start preparing your roses and your entire garden for the changing season ahead. The first thing to bear in mind if you're growing potted roses and you've had water retaining sources underneath of them, the first thing to start thinking about doing as we move into September, into October, and we start getting the nighttime temperatures start to drop, is to remove the water retaining sources from underneath the pots and get them up off the ground onto pot feet. This will stop any water freezing in the pot and cause damage to the actual root systems, as well as damaging your precious terracotta or glazed pots. If you've been regularly water or foliar feeding your plants, now is a really good time to stop, as you start to see the amount of blooms being produced by the plant really drop away, and maybe the leaves are starting to change colour, normally stimulated by the fact the days are starting to get shorter and the evening temperatures are starting to drop away. There's no need to be applying a liquid feed to your plants anymore, so you can put that away for the rest of the season. Climbing and rambling roses at this stage can also have loose growth loosely tied in using Hessian twine. This protects it from the worst of the winter weather, stops it rocking about and possibly damaging not only the growth itself but also the main parts of the stem. At this stage you don't want to do any major pruning, because during the winter months we're going to remove the plant from its structure and completely prune it before reapplying it, again tying it in with Hessian twine. If you live in a particularly exposed or windy location, or you have large plants like this one which produces large, long, graceful leaders that could rock about in the winter and autumn winds, do consider removing around a third of the top growth. You don't want to be doing too much pruning at this stage because you don't want to be causing dieback, but also you don't want the plant to be rocked around in the autumn winds, which could actually cause problems to the root system. So consider just removing around a third of the top growth, prune it back to an outward facing strong bud, but remove no more than a third at this stage. If you're growing roses like the lark ascending next to me that are starting to form good quality hips for the season ahead, consider leaving this growth in place and don't prune them off. Allow these just to ripen up and enjoy them for the season ahead. Now is also a really good time to start thinking about winterizing and draining down any irrigation pipes or hoses that you have offering your roses water in the garden. Much as they might need a little bit of help over the coming weeks, and it's not unusual for it still to be quite mild as we move into September and October, now is a good time to get this job done. Once you've done your autumn pruning to reduce the amount of growth that's on the plant by around a third, it's a really good time now to go around the bottom of the plant and remove any fallen debris or leaves, also any weeds that may be growing. And at this point, if you're living in zones 4, 5 and 6, it's a really good idea to now start thinking about applying a protective mulch around the base of your roses. Advice on this has changed over the last few years, and in the last 5 or 6 years I've had to start planting roses differently here in the garden. The advice here in the UK was always to make sure that graft or union was planted around 2 inches above soil height. Now, with the weather becoming much more unpredictable, the suggestion is we put that union or graft point at least 2 or 3 inches below the ground level, just to protect it from the worst of the winter weather, as it is mostly the weakest point of the plant. However, if you're growing in zones 4, 5 and 6, you're also going to be seeing temperatures plummet well into the minus figures. And even if you have planted the graft below ground, you now want to start thinking about applying a protective mulch. Now, this can be anything from leaf litter to purposely made organic compost. You can also use something like this, which is a landscaper's bark, a really good thing. Applying around 2 bucketfuls around the base of the plant will protect the stems from the worst of the winter weather, keeping the frost off, keeping a nice porous and open structure around them. In the springtime, once you've passed through the worst of the winter weather and you do your pruning to make sure that you see whether you've got any dieback whatsoever, this mulch can be pulled away and just be added to the general mulch that are around your plants, improving the soil condition. But at this stage, around 4 or 5 gallons of mulch heaped up around the plant, covering around 6 to 8 inches of the stem growth just as it emerges from the ground, will protect those stems from the worst of the winter weather. If you live somewhere particularly cold in zones 4, 5 and 6, for instance, consider bringing pot grown specimens like this Astacia vi in for the winter. All you need to do is make sure they've received their first frost or so, the leaves have started to go yellow and they've started to drop. Then you can consider moving the entire container into the lee of a building, under a carport, or maybe into a garage or shed with a window. Just make sure that you take the worst of the winter weather off. If you're not able to move your containers, consider wrapping your containers in something like this. This is an old dust sheet used for decorating. It's 100% cotton. As long as the material is breathable, you can simply wrap this around the terracotta pot or your container and tie it on with some string. This will take the worst of the bite out of that winter chill and make sure the roots aren't frosted off. And lastly, and most importantly for me, if you still have any blooms being produced anywhere in the garden, enjoy them. These last few blooms of the season are always, in my opinion, the sweetest. The colours are normally the most intense and they have the most special qualities about them. Consider cutting them and bringing them into the house, even if it's not something you normally do. I hope you've enjoyed my guide to winterising your roses, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop me a comment below.